Today, we're going to see if Caterham could have done anything in the sport had they not been struck by financial burdens in this 10-year simulation. As is the norm in these videos, we start with Verstappen cruising to the title. The battle behind him was very close though, as Russell, Leclerc and Sainz all fought for second place. Each driver from 2nd down to 7th managed a single win each, and this meant it was very close in the standings. Verstappen nearly doubled Perez's points title and Norris was far ahead of Piastri. Onto the second half of the grid, Alonso managed 58 of Aston's 64 points as they got 5th, and Gasly also carried Alpine to 6th. The backmarkers managed a few points but not many, and Caterham occupied a very familiar position, 11th. Their drivers were Ericsson, who raced there in his debut season in 2014, and Jack Doohan, because Caterham were very closely aligned with Renault in their days. With the boring stuff out the way, let's move on to the driver moves. In season 1, Hulkenberg immediately quit the sport because clearly Audi hadn't bought out Sauber yet, and this led Doohan to jump ship and join Haas. Caterham responded by stealing Sauber's top talent, Theo Pourchaire. For next year, we have durability regulation changes, and as you can see in the chart, Caterham are quite a bit off the back of the grid. Red Bull are just ahead of Mercedes and the other teams follow them closely behind. Well, Max was champion once again, but this one was a lot closer. First off, Mercedes were pretty good, and had Hamilton and Russell not been scrapping amongst themselves, there was a chance one of them would have taken the championship. As fate had it though, Verstappen's 5 wins were enough to win by 38 points on his way to a second title. Hamilton got 4 wins, as did Russell, and Norris broke the 200 point mark. Like last year, Norris was way ahead of Piastri and Perez was completely off the pace, even though he did get a win, but he still cost the team first in the constructors. Alpine achieved a lot more points, mainly down to Gasly getting 71, and they were ahead of Aston Martin. Talking of Aston, Fernando managed another podium, although the team slipped down to 6th place. The order of the backmarkers stayed pretty similar, as Caterham was still dead last after another disappointing season. They probably would have done better if they'd used their F2 car, judging by Pourchaire finishing 23rd in the 22 car championship. But that means it's now time for the transfers, and we start at mid-season when Fernando retired. Clearly the Lance Stroll tax was having an effect on him, and so he dipped out of there. Magnussen was his replacement, with Lawson heading to the free seat at Haas. At postseason though, we got some juicy moves. First to go was Piastri, who was replaced by Tsunoda at McLaren. Albon then went to AlphaTauri, which meant Oscar had nowhere else to go but Williams. Doohan also seat swapped with the Freedom Merchant Logan Sargent to complete the grid for season 3. We do have more reg changes as power and chassis are getting affected, and looking at the chart, we can see teams like McLaren hitting their peaks, with Red Bull and Aston Martin being very close behind. Let's see if those reg changes spice it up in season 3. Well, there was a change in the order as Russell managed to win the championship. We almost got a Silver War Part 2 as Hamilton was only 40 points off, and an incredible turn of events saw Gasly and Alpine rise to 3rd place in both championships. It's going to be sad when F1 24 comes out because this is never going to happen, judging by how bad Alpine have been this year. 3 wins is crazy in an Alpine, and Ocon also managed a podium. And where, you ask? Of course, it was at Monza in an Alpine 1-2. This happens at least once every sim, I can't. Verstappen managed to drag Red Bull to 4th in the constructors as Perez didn't even make the top 10, and McLaren were also quite off the pace as Norris and Tsunoda were 7th and 9th, and Yuki even won at Monaco in a McLaren 1-2. Another shock was Williams, well, mainly Piastri, because he scored all of their points, including 2 podiums. AlphaTauri also managed points in this crazy season as Aston Martin fell down to 7th place. Caterham stayed at the foot of the table as they continued to run their awful F1 car while still trying to keep the lights on. But now we move on to the moves, and at mid-season, Caterham replaced Pourchaire with Drugovich. They're swapping as many drivers now as they did when they were actually in F1. But at season's end, Hamilton called it quits and was replaced by Dennis Hauger. Sainz was dropped by Ferrari after beating the Golden Boy Leclerc, and he was replaced by Liam Lawson. Drugovich went to Haas and Fittipaldi joined the Caterham team. We wouldn't be getting more reg change for season 4, but as we can see in the chart, Caterham are getting much closer year on year. Aston Martin apparently have the fastest car now and are followed by the usual suspects as McLaren are only the 7th quickest. It seems Caterham are nearly there, so can they manage any points in season 4? Well, they did, and we even got a new winner to celebrate. Norris cruised to the title with 8 wins as Tsunoda settled for a runners-up spot, just 10 points ahead of Verstappen. McLaren recovered from their slump in season 3 as they won the constructors as well. Gasly did his job once again and dragged Alpine to 4th in the standings just behind Red Bull. But it was a battle of the average teammates in 9th and 10th as Ocon was 7 points ahead of Perez, as clearly Perez's 3 podiums were the difference. But we have to talk about Caterham because they didn't just score 1 point and finish 10th, they got 8th and finished 7th, 1 point above Williams. After 3 years of trying to develop an F2 car, the Caterham engineers were finally able to feed their families as their cash prize from finishing 7th is a lot more than what you get if you finish in 11th, which is nothing. Back to the front of the grid, Leclerc also managed a win in 8th place and Drugovich got 2. But how come he got 2 wins if he was driving for Haas? Well, it's time for the driver moves. At mid-season, Hauger was deleted by Mercedes and put in the Haas car as Drugovich replaced him. Fittipaldi was also dropped by Caterham as they managed to get Daniel Ricciardo. Clearly, he likes fighting at the back of the grid now. And finally, Sainz took any seat he could and joined AlphaTauri. At post-season, Ricciardo did a U-turn and returned home to AlphaTauri for his 17th stint with the team, and Sainz went to Caterham. Ericsson was also bored of this show, even though they just started to improve, and terminated his contract in order to go and do IndyCar. Caterham then drafted in another former driver in Heikki Kovalainen, complete with the Angry Birds helmet to take that second seat. With aero reg changes coming for season 5, Caterham were ready to take on the rest of the grid, and as you can see, they are firmly in the midfield now. With an amazing driver in the form of Sainz in the car, let's see how high they can go. Norris was once again top as he and McLaren casually destroyed the entirety of the grid. He took 12 wins and Yuki secured the last 4 to conclude a very boring championship. There were some other shocks across the grid as Piastri and Doohan combined at Williams and missed out on second place by just 1 point to Red Bull. I really don't know how they got to be this good and yet Piastri didn't even win a race. Makes it even more impressive. Ocon also started to pull his weight as he and Gasly got Alpine to 4th place. Mercedes and Ferrari had really fallen off, and this is evident by the fact they finished behind bloody Caterham. Sainz had come in and pulled off miracles as he got 126 points and 5 podiums. Heikki was there, I guess, as he got 17 points and barely helped. Apart from the Norris domination, this was a very interesting season, kind of similar to what's happening in real life. But onto the moves, and boy were there some moves. First to go was Bottas, who retired from the sport with Sargent heading to the sinking Alfa Romeo. Fittipaldi went to Haas, and finally, after just getting back into the sport and taking an awful team to 5th place, Sainz retired. And so this paved the way for a new, young, exciting talent, Kamui Kobayashi, baby. So it was redemption time for Kamui in Season 6, and looking at the chart, it's close at the top and Caterham are right in the mix. In Season 6, it was a return to form for Verstappen, who just about beat the Mercedes of Drugovich and Caterham's Kobayashi to the title. In this comeback season, he managed 2 wins and 6 podiums and helped Caterham climb another place to 4th in the standings. It was close all round as Norris was chilling in 4th place and Russell got 4 wins to finish 5th. Williams kept up their good performances as they fell only to 5th place, and Ferrari continued to be kind of mid as Lawson was the only red car in the top 10. Perez cost Red Bull the constructors once again, and even McLaren managed to finish ahead of Red Bull. But with all bases covered, let's move to the transfers. Finally, after years of holding Red Bull back, Perez retired from the sport with Russell replacing him. Vesely headed to Mercedes and the other Red Bull driver also retired. This meant Fittipaldi went to Red Bull for Season 7. Haas signed up Pourchaire, Kobayashi retired for probably the 2nd time, and his replacement was Alpine's Pierre Gasly. To be honest, a move I could see happening had Caterham stayed in F1 and been around when Gasly made his debut. But this meant Piastri went to Alpine, Magnussen went to Williams, and Vips moved to Aston Martin. There are no reg changes once again, and the chart is just a bunch of straight lines because of this. Caterham apparently 2nd best though, so that's pretty good. So with this upward trajectory, surely Season 7 would be the year that a title challenge could happen. And finally, Caterham have the championship that they so desperately craved. They probably cared a bit more about getting actual money in, but either way, here we are. Pierre Gasly is now a world champion with Caterham F1. He beat Drugovich to the title as the Brazilian finished 2nd once again, and wins were very spread out. Surprisingly, 7th place Vesely got the most wins out of everyone with 4, and they were first for Piastri and Fittipaldi with the latter getting his in a 1-2 at Monza. Mercedes were first once again and Caterham stayed 4th mainly because of Kovalainen, but at least Leclerc managed to sneak back into the top 10 again. Williams also kept up the good form as they were 6th ahead of Alpine, who struggled without Gasly. The craziest thing as well was that, and this takes us into the driver transfers section, Vesti won 4 races in the first 8 and had 144 points at mid-season. And then he only scored 3 more points. Well, this is because Toto Wolff sacked him and replaced him with Piastri, clearly taking lessons from Helmut Marko. Other moves included Doohan going to AlphaTauri, Vesti moving to Williams, Fittipaldi going to Alpine, Tsunoda finally getting the call to go to Red Bull, and Albon moving to McLaren. After years of silence from the FIA, we finally have reg changes. Power, durability and chassis would all be affected, and we will see if this dents the powerhouse that is now Caterham. Nothing was going to stop Gasly and Caterham as they continued to move up the standings, as now only Mercedes stood in their way. 8 wins was enough for Gasly to clinch the title by 24 points, and Piastri did well to challenge with only 3 wins. Drogovic missed out again and Norris was 4th once again, but special mention to Vesti, who managed 116 points in the Williams to take them to 5th. They've been the surprise of this sim, and they were even ahead of Ferrari, who once again only had 1 car in the top 10. Russell nearly doubled Yuki's points and Norris almost did the same with Albon, but Red Bull went nowhere near anyone anyway. There's not much else to say, so let's move on to the driver moves. After winning 2 championships, what is the usual reaction? Well, normally it would be to try and win a few more. But Gasly's idol wasn't Zidane, Prost or any successful French person. Instead, it was a YouTuber, a Monaco-based YouTuber. And so, at the end of the season, Pierre copied what his favourite F1 YouTuber did and did a Rosberg. This shocked the F1 grid so much that Stroll finally woke up and moved to a different team. Doohan headed the other way. But at Ferrari, Leclerc escaped and he managed to flee to Caterham, as Ocon moved to Maranello. Novalak completed the grid by joining Alpine. We wouldn't get any more reg changes, so we can move on to season 9. Caterham continued their dominance in the driver's standings as Leclerc finally got back to winning ways. He managed 7 victories ahead of both Mercedes once again, and Norris was 4th again. McLaren were just 3 points behind Red Bull despite this because of Albon being 8th. Tsunoda managed to beat Russell this time, and the Brit was behind Vesti in a Williams. Because of Vesti, Williams stayed 5th and there was not a sign of Ferrari anywhere. The order in the constructors stayed the same, and clearly Stroll had not been doing anything in the clearly decent Aston Martin because Doohan hopped in it and immediately scored 51 points. Fittipaldi also did well at Alpine, getting 43 out of their 45 points. Onto the driver moves, and it was a quiet one as the only transfer was a swap from Vips and Novalak. We would begin aero change for the final year, so could Caterham use this to their advantage to finally win the constructors? Finally, Piastri became a world champion after finishing in the top 3 multiple times. He didn't get a single win for the first 6.5 seasons of the sim, but his move to Mercedes was perfect, and now he's the first Aussie world champion since Alan Jones. Leclerc was 2nd and Drogovic was 3rd once again. Caterham fell back down to 4th, but overall it has been a good sim for them. But another team that did very well this time was Williams, who came 6th and scored another 100 points, all thanks to Vesti. But that's all from me today. As I said at the start, there will be one more sim on F1 23 before we move on to F1 24. But if you want to know how well Ford would do in F1, click the video on screen right now.